Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. Happy to have you with us. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see all three of us, Daniel Gallen, myself, Mark Brennan. We're going to be joining you on Monday afternoons, fresh out of Beaver Stadium. We have our press conference with James Franklin at noon every Monday moving forward throughout the season. We started last week. Updates already over at Lions 24/7. We'll get back home. We'll do some writing we got to get done. We already have some stories up from James Franklin, a full video of his 45-minute press conference on a Monday. And now we'll gather to share some thoughts, and we can check in with Mark Brennan. He's outside, and he's got this fancy microphone. He's got his sunglasses removed now, and reporting live from Brennan's backyard. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. You probably can't see it. That's Beaver Stadium way back there. So I figure once a year I like to come out here, and I have to get used to looking at a computer screen with the sun glaring, because that's kind of our new gig up in the press box. So it's good to be outside. If it's too loud, just let me know, and I'll move somewhere else.
I think we're in good shape. And yeah, for folks who don't know it, and that's probably most of you, Mark's got an incredible panoramic view of Happy Valley from his back deck, and that includes Beaver Stadium. Some great shots that
you don't have to visit though. You don't. Everybody doesn't have to come over and check it out. I'll post a photo on Facebook or Twitter.
But Mark, we want to kind of always open up our Monday show with you, not on about where you are broadcasting from, but about what you witnessed and what you took away from the most recent matchup. Mark gets, before he shuts his eyes and lets his brain rest after these games, there's a few guarantees. You're going to see grades up from Mark. You're going to see top takeaways up from Mark, whether the game's a late night kickoff, a noon kickoff, and you got that this weekend as well. So a couple of mainstays in our post-game coverage for all the years I've been with this site. And Mark, now that you've got that all, and then hopefully people have been well-versed in some of your writing on the matchup, bring it to the podcast forum. What stood out most from our first look at Penn State football?
Yeah, we got great feedback on the grades. I mean, a game like that is very difficult to grade because do you do it based on winning 46-11, or do you do it based on how does that Penn State team look compared to what we expect? And, I think even the coaches and players would admit that there was a lot to be desired coming out of that game. That's not saying it was a negative. I mean, to me, the positives were, number one, they got out of that thing very healthy as far as we could tell, right? Got a lot of young players, a lot of reps, no turnovers. I mean, one fumble, but no turnovers. So all these things that could be issues early in a season, we're seeing guys getting banged up all over the place. We're seeing teams with turnover issues. I don't think penalties were a huge deal. I mean, they were maybe at the end of the game for James Franklin, but all in all, I think I gave it a B, and I think that's about right. I mean, the defense, I would have given them like an A+ if not for the last series or two. But when you're grading, you have to take into account the young guys who got in there and how important that was at the end of the game, and they didn't quite get it done. And then offense moved the ball really well. They didn't have to punt, but I'm still looking at it like a C because no explosive plays. I mean, very few explosive plays, I should say. Nothing. We were all predicting something gigantic, and some of us were predicting multiple gigantics, and it just didn't happen. Part of that was because they didn't take a ton of deep shots when Allar did, and Grunk. You look at their combined numbers, 15-plus passes, 15-yard plus passes. They were very efficient. I don't have the numbers right here in front of me, but it was a high percentage. But I don't think that Kotelnicki wanted to show everything. I think the biggest issue coming out of that game was the inability of the ground game to just dominate. I know James Franklin said they were putting 5 men in the box, and if you're Nevada, what do you do to stop Penn State? Well, that's going to be everybody. So they're going to have to figure that out. I think some of that could be mitigated with the long passing game, but some people made really good points on the board. Can they afford to be monkeying around by not showing everything in the long passing game, given how much of an issue that was for almost the entirety of last year? So those were the things that stuck out to me kind of team-wise. Deny Dennis Sutton, he should have been the player of the game, but I think you know what you're going to get out of Deny Dennis Sutton. So I gave it to Hudson because I think Deny was my number 2. I gave it to Hudson because I think what he was able to do early in that game, and then in scoring touchdowns, in making that great toe tap catch on the sideline, you know what you're getting out of Deny this season. We saw it through the college football playoff. No surprise at all that you're seeing it against Nevada, right? I think Kyron Hudson and I think Pena both stepping up and playing well was huge for them. I sent a note late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, whenever it might have been, that it was the first time they had any receiver, wide receiver, with 6 catches or more in a game in 2 seasons, and the first time they had 2 of them since November of 2023. So, though, very great sign for Penn State. And then defensively, I know I'm going on here. Some of those young defenders just look completely out of control. And I don't know that that's a bad thing. You know, Coleman, Kamaju, I think that's actually okay. That's why they're out there in these games. Because, you know, we had Steve Smear on the Nitwits, and he's a former All-American. He knows football as well as anybody. And he's like, man, that Coleman kid, he was like all over the place, but could they really rely on him? Well, yeah, I think you have to give him a few games so he gets his kind of sea legs. And he would not be out there, and they wouldn't be talking him up unless he was really good. So I know I rambled on a little bit there, but those were some of the things that stood out to me. Hey, one other thing, shout out to Pat Kraft and the university for what they did making that 106,000 seat stadium. I was looking, was it the Missouri game where they're undergoing construction and like half the stadium seemed empty? For them to be able to put on that kind of show while you're undergoing the significant renovations, I think was very impressive. And I'll leave the press box out of it because nobody cares about that.
The atmosphere was where you want it to be. And yeah, like you said, when you're undergoing a major renovation, that's going to take us into 2027. Good for them for juggling that process and being able to kind of have that environment at Beaver Stadium for a big season. Mark, no need to apologize. I think we can maybe name the first segment of our Monday episodes Mark's monologue, because that's what we want from him. Me and Daniel go back and forth for 40 minutes or so, deep into the night. Sometimes we lose track of what we're even talking about by that time of the night with our post-game podcast. But we got that up on Saturday. We did include your note about the receivers. I actually led off my story about the transfer receivers with your note about going back to November 2023, the last time a receiver had 6+ catches in a game. We saw 2 of them do it in their debuts on Saturday. Daniel, before we turn our full focus over to James Franklin's press conference, and we did get several updates today coming out of that, anything you wanted to add on to the conversation you and I had late in Beaver Stadium on Saturday night? Hopefully people check that out either late Saturday, early Sunday, and by now you've had a chance to check out our post-game podcast. We'll be back with one of those after every single Penn State matchup, as you've come to expect.
Yeah, I think to go off of what Mark said about the stadium, we didn't touch on that in the postgame podcast on Saturday night, but I spent probably like an hour earlier in the afternoon walking around. I walked to the top of the temporary bleachers. I walked under the temporary bleachers. I walked around that construction site on the west side of the stadium. And I think, like Mark said, Penn State deserves a lot of credit for, having this. It doesn't feel like you're in a construction zone when you're there. Mark talked about Missouri. I know these past couple of years, Florida State and Oregon State are 2 programs that did extensive renovations on their stadiums. And there's a lot of blank space in those stadiums. Like, you could see where the construction was being done. I think for Penn State to do it in this fashion, to do it in this phase, really smart. And then, yeah, they're making great use of the new space that's been created. I told you guys, I think some of the drink rails on the west side of the stadium, I think Kraft said that those are all sold out for the season, but those might be the best seats in Beaver Stadium. The view from those temporary bleachers is really good. Not sure how I would feel being packed up in there in the whiteout when there's a big play. Also, if you're going to be up there, don't forget your sunglasses because it is very bright off of that metal for day games. But yeah, I mean, you wonder what it's going to be like with this big project going on. And, we've just seen every step of this because we live in Happy Valley. We're on campus a lot. You really can't miss Beaver Stadium. So we've seen all the incremental steps to lead up to this point, and to see the product as is right now, I think it's going to make for really great environment for what should be a special season for Penn State.
Let's work our way through some of the commentary from James Franklin on this Monday afternoon. Penn State moving on from the season opener against Nevada, getting ready for game number 2 against Florida International this Saturday. That's a matchup we'll focus on more later in the week. But for right now, a lot of in-house stuff regarding Penn State's development. And of course, a lot of the story this year is what can QB1 do for his team and what can QB1 do for his draft stock. Drew Allar has been in the spotlight a long time as a former 5-star recruit, made his 30th career start at the college level on Saturday, completed 85% of passes, 217 yards and a touchdown along the way. Also did some things with his legs, something we expect to see more after last year. Was a good step forward in that department. Had a first down run on a 3rd and 5. He also had a couple different runs of 10+ yards. And Mark, Daniel and I spent quite a bit of time discussing the command that Drew Allar seemed to be in with this offensive attack, working with new pieces in the passing game. What did you see from Drew Allar on Saturday? Because James Franklin said he saw essentially what he expected to see. He said it was a clean performance from Allar, and he also noted that some of those throws, especially on some of the out patterns, were as good as you'll find in college football, and there's only a few players in the NFL, says James Franklin, who can make those kind of throws.
Yeah, I'll go back to what I said before. I love the fact that they immediately got Hudson and Pena involved. I mean, 3 of the first 4 plays. Now, granted, one of them was a handoff to Pena, but still getting both of those guys involved and then hitting both of those guys in key situations. Listen, we're probably beating a dead horse at this point, but that was an albatross on this team coming out of that Notre Dame game. And I don't think, where they didn't have a wide receiver make one single catch. And I'll let it go after saying it today because they came out, and I don't think it was a coincidence that Kotelnicki very early in that game made sure that not only was the ball getting out, but that it was getting out to the wide receivers because, the tight ends may have not had the overall impact in that game that maybe some of us expected. But I'm not worried about that because we know what Dinkins can do. We know what Reynolds can do. And I loved what we saw out of Rapp late in the game. He didn't look like a guy who was coming off of an injury other than the big wrap on his leg. So I like to – Franklin said it today as we taped this on Monday, that the way that Allar and Grunk were both able to get rid of the ball quickly, I thought was really a good thing, and just a sense that this whole thing with them in year number 2 in the Kotelnicki offense, I think there is something to that they're just more comfortable. Grunk it's important for Grunk, but it's especially important for Allar, just because there were times last year where he didn't look to be quite as decisive. So I think the one thing that's missing is the ability to bust some of those long passes, and maybe that's something that we'll see coming up against FIU.
Average depth of pass for Drew Allar. I know, Daniel, this is something you brought up on the postgame podcast, being curious about. On Saturday, it was 7.1 yards. Last season, on average, it was 9.1 yards. So we'll see if we can get to see another layer of this pass attack on Saturday against FIU. You'd love to see some signs of that before they get into the whiteout game in late September against Oregon, when it feels like you've got to really show what you're all about. Kind of some tinkering opportunities these next few weeks. And in that regard, Penn State staff had a really good chance to dive into some film, critique, perhaps praise a bit with Ethan Grunkemeyer. Coming into the season, only 2 career pass attempts, both of them late in that cold matchup against SMU in the playoffs. This time around, he got a couple series. One of them was a 94-yard, 15-play possession that he capped off with a 6-yard run. He went 7 for 9 passing. We talked about the ball placement being in a good spot, and got a lot of feedback from James Franklin on Monday. And Daniel, I think it's safe to say that whether or not the QB2 job is done at this point, we don't know. Maybe we can push James Franklin on that subject Wednesday a bit, but certainly Ethan Grunkemeyer strengthened his case to remain the clear backup to Drew Allar.
Yeah, Tyler, you made a good point when we were done, that the way that James Franklin talked about Grunkemeyer's performance today, there was no, well, we want to see Jackson Smolik next. We want to see more, of Jackson, and he didn't bring up, the competition's ongoing. That sort of thing. I know the way the question was framed was specifically about Grunkemeyer and what he did, but James Franklin can take things in the directions that he wants to. So I thought that was notable. I think the most interesting thing that Franklin said was that Grunkemeyer played better than he'd practiced at certain points across the fall, and I think that kind of tracks with what Franklin said last week when he talked about that Grunkemeyer was just more consistent across camp, coupled with before that when he said they were ready to name a number 2, then some consistency issues happened, and then they felt comfortable again. So it does sound like there's a little bit of an up and down for Grunkemeyer throughout preseason camp, and for him to come out and be steady like he was, I think that's significant for Penn State. I think that we've always been high on his physical tools. We saw him a couple times in a camp setting. I saw him live at Olentangy High outside Columbus 2 years ago. He, in all our interactions, I really like his makeup and his demeanor. So it seems like he has the tools. It's just been putting them together. Now that he's in year 2, getting these live reps, I think we're really going to find out a lot more what he's about over these past 2 weeks. And that's something Penn State needs to know too, as it goes deeper into the schedule and beyond.
Hey, I'm glad he was better against the Nevada defense than he was against the Penn State defense. I mean, I think there might have been, Franklin said he looked better in this game than he did in practice. And I wonder why. He didn't have denied Dennis Sutton Jason after him and, an unbelievable defensive backfield. But I think that was good that the moment wasn't too big for him. Obviously he came into a game where, in a college football playoff where the game was long since over. And this game was over too, but he got an extended run, and I thought he composed himself well.
Yeah, he probably had, 35 practices over the course of the year against Penn State's defense, which is filled with future NFL talent, working against this known mastermind in Jim Knowles. So, yeah, a different structure facing Nevada. But at the same time, kind of conversely, James Franklin also said you're kind of living in a fairy tale world when you're a quarterback on a practice field, because if a defensive end even threatens to get on you, they're probably going to be running laps or doing up downs or taking a seat. And so in this situation, Nevada's defenders are very motivated to put you on your ass. And so we didn't really see Ethan Grunkemeyer get throttled in the backfield, but it was a chance where he was facing truly live bullets, and you're kind of out of you don't feel like the staff's breathing on your neck. I know that's kind of strange because these are the reps that are ultimately going to be scrutinized most. They're in front of the world. They're against an opponent. But there is a sense when you've got Danny O'Brien, Andy Kotelnicki, James Franklin a few yards behind you, you may be a little less decisive. That sounded like James Franklin liked the decisiveness he saw, a willingness to maybe get the ball out of his hand that hadn't necessarily seen on the practice field. So when you're out there full speed with your teammates, you're going play by play. Sounds like some things clicked in for Ethan Grunkemeyer that maybe didn't on the practice field, and you wonder what that can do for him moving forward. Sometimes it takes one good game experience for a quarterback to really build off that. And if he can do that, it's great news for him. Not so good for Jackson Smolik, who right now, quarterback 3. We'll see if that's his permanent spot on this roster. But he did get out there for one snap. It's one that James Franklin clearly would love to get back. It's something they'll find in the special teams playbook and burn it, that 2-point conversion, based on the way James Franklin has publicly discussed what went wrong there. But we'll learn a little bit more, I think, if we get through this next game and there's still no Jackson Smolik and Ethan Grunkemeyer can play well. It's going to be hard to maybe reverse course on where QB2 conversation is heading. Meanwhile, in terms of backup jobs, RB3 has been a topic of conversation throughout the offseason, preseason, and now through one game. Mark, James Franklin said that is a battle that is still ongoing, and it's a battle that was incomplete in the season opener. We got some looks at Cam Wallace, which was fantastic to see him. He had a 12-yard catch in which he hurdled a defender and back from his injury from last September. We got a little bit of Corey Smith out there. Didn't do a lot with his 5 carries, but him and Cam Wallace were involved. None of the freshmen in terms of Tyke Hayes and Jabri Coleman, but Quentin Martin has long been a part of this conversation. And Franklin said the reason we didn't see him out there on offense or on special teams, he's a core special teams player for this team, because he had a tweak of something during preseason camp, limited him for a couple of weeks. He was cleared coming into game week, but not where I guess they wanted him to be for this first matchup. So a guy to keep an eye on moving forward. And Mark, it just seems like unless maybe Cam Wallace goes and starts stacking these kind of performances and flashing, there's going to need to be some convincing for Stan Drayton and this coaching staff over the course of the next few games at least.
Yeah, the reaction when Cam Wallace did that was, I thought it was the loudest reaction in the stadium. And then going back and watching the replay, it was really fun watching the way his teammates reacted. I had a chance to ask Drew Allar and Nick Singleton about it after the game, and both of them were amped up. But this seems like a 3-guy race, right? With all due respect to the freshmen, they're being kind of thrown in there at this point, at least it seems to me, almost just to not exclude them in these discussions. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you're this deep. Do you really want to be wasting red shirts of anybody besides guys who have already redshirted, if that makes sense? I know I'm talking kind of in a circle, but yeah, I mean, getting Quentin Martin back, when is that going to happen? Not sure. It does sound to me as if they were erring on the side of caution with Quinn and Zariah Fisher. I'm sure we'll get over to that side of the ball. And I think that's smart at this time of year. There's absolutely no reason at all, if somebody's even the slightest bit dinged, that you want to go messing around with that. But the fact that the two guys you mentioned, Corey Smith and Wallace, both got some decent run, I thought was good for both of them.
Quentin Martin, different body type. We've talked about that. It's been referenced by the staff.
Receiver too, yeah.
Yeah, long, 6'1". The frame's just different than other guys in that room, and he has been considered, a pretty excellent receiver. I don't know if he's the best in that group because Nick Singleton's made a lot of strides, but it was a really key piece of his prospect profile coming to a college campus was what he can do as a pass target as well. So maybe we'll get a look this Saturday. James Franklin certainly didn't indicate this is a lingering issue. Just wanted to maybe work his feet underneath him again with some more practice work. And you referenced it there, Mark, and Zariah Fisher's absence is probably the one that loomed largest when we looked at Saturday's matchup because it opened the floodgates to get a lot of work for those freshman eligible defensive ends. And there's a lot of them. You got the red shirts and Malachi Williams and Jalen Harvey. Harvey got the start. You also had the true freshman and Yvonne Kamaju and Coleman, Chaz Coleman, getting 20 plus reps. Same for Jalen Harvey. You had 4 young defensive ends. All of them that I just referenced were over a dozen snaps. We know what Denai Dennis Sutton did. He was dominant. He made a case for being the best player on the field. It's not going to be the final time he does that over the course of this fall. But Daniel, the longer we don't see Zariah Fisher, it's kind of a double-edged sword. We're going to see some scrambling. We're going to see guys learning on the job out there, but we're also going to see game by game that seasoning come for this group of young players. James Franklin says once they get to game 4, game 5, that young player title, he says, is off the table. They're going to have reps at the college level. They're going to expect them to perform like that in games. Regarding Zariah Fisher, as encouraging as it gets for a guy who's missed this many games because of injuries. Franklin said they got to the stadium. Fisher was excited about the potential to be able to play. They decided to pull him back. By the time we got that mandated announcement of player eligibility or play availability, no Zariah Fisher. He's out for the game. But Franklin basically categorized it as they didn't feel like he had the practice reps under him leading up to the matchup. He's been banged up a little bit. But I'm getting the sense here that it's going to be a week-to-week evaluation. They think he's in a spot where he can play. But how much do you put this guy in bubble wrap between now and the Oregon game? Either way, you're kind of crossing your fingers with Zariah Fisher, missing 25 of the last 42 Nittany Lions matchups.
Yeah, Franklin made it sound like Fisher was close to playing on Saturday. He worded it that they were hopeful to have Zariah. They got to the game and he was excited and wanted to play, but they held him because he hadn't practiced enough. So they didn't feel that he was ready from that perspective to go out in live game action. We hadn't seen him at practice. I think the previous 2 sessions that we had access to at least. We'll be out there Wednesday evening. We'll see if he's there. I think that'll be the indication of where he is in terms of whether he'll play. But yeah, I mean, I think that you've got a lot of guys that, and I thought Franklin put it well that these are young guys now, but by September 27th, they can't be young guys anymore. I think usually we hear that type of wording when we get to November, where it's like in November, you're not a freshman anymore, but because of the experience you have, a little bit of an accelerated learning curve for these younger guys, given the depth that Penn State has or doesn't have after Denai Dennis Sutton at the top. So seems encouraging on Zariah Fisher. I think we saw some encouraging things from guys like Chaz Coleman, Yvonne Kamaju, Jalen Harvey. I thought Malachi Williams did some nice things late. But we're going to have to continue to watch that over the course of these next couple of weeks ahead of that Oregon game. And we'll see when Zariah Fisher fits into that.
Franklin gave a nice little anecdote. It seems to have a lot of them. Everyone seems to have a lot of them when it comes to Chaz Coleman. But he talked about going into the tunnel after this game and Coleman kind of approaching him and saying, kind of glad that we got out of the way because I was nervous. Now I don't have to be nervous anymore. And I don't know if this had anything to do with nerves, but I don't know if we referenced it on the postgame podcast. Chaz Coleman was kind of like freelancing during the early stages of pregame work. We hadn't really seen anything like this. It was pretty fascinating. He was fielding kickoffs with the running backs and King Mac, or with King Mac. And then Daniel, you said he was over with the running back group. I don't know if he was just kind of taking it all in and was out in the field ahead of when he was supposed to, or if they just want this kid to feel like he can play any position. But he was eyes wide open, according to James Franklin, going into this matchup. And the thought process is, now that you've got that checked off your list, when you return to Beaver Stadium next week and the week after that, you can be a little bit maybe more focused on the task at hand versus the moment of making your college debut. A lot to monitor with that defensive end group, and we'll see if Zariah Fisher gets back into the mix this Saturday, if we got to wait a little bit longer for that. Jumping over to Andrew Rapplier and the tight end group. Mark, I mentioned on the podcast, it was hard, not to identify and really enjoy what Andrew Rapplier was able to accomplish with some limited work. We saw a lot of Luke Reynolds, Khalil Dinkins involved. Both of them started this game, but coming out of the matchup, and James Franklin said it on Monday, it is a, quote, tight end committee. It's a 3-man conversation. And if there was any doubt about Andrew Rapplier working his way back into that conversation, it was dispelled based on the sample size we got. A few catches. One of those was called back, maybe have been his best catch of the day. And he also was effective as a blocker out there. Big passion player. We know what he brings from an enthusiasm standpoint, but let's take note of what he might mean for this offense as a blocker and as a pass target.
Yeah, at the start of training camp, remember, he was still kind of favoring that leg. And I don't think it was injured. I think it was just the natural kind of defense mechanisms of trying to get back to kind of where you were. And by the end of camp, we weren't seeing that at all. And then we certainly did not see it in that game. So I thought that was gigantic for them. And I thought it was really big that they were able to get him so involved. It was the blue-white game, 2 years ago, where he looked really, really good. And all we had heard his freshman year is how good he was. And had he been in any other tight end room, that he would not have redshirted, but they were loaded with Warren and was it Theo at that point? I always get Theo and Strange, but so they were loaded, and they had Dinkins then as well, so they didn't need him. But to have him emerging, he was a guy that we figured was going to be tight end number 2, or at least I did last year. And that's no disrespect toward Dinkins, but just everything we were hearing from people before he got banged up. So for him to play well, I also like the fact that they left Dinkins in there until he was able to get a catch. There are certain areas where I don't love that, where I'd rather see younger players. But this guy has done all of the dirty work for multiple years now. And I think it's incumbent on them to get him as involved in the passing game as possible without hurting other areas for his future. I mean, he's sacrificed a lot. He's taken a back seat and done all of the dirty work. And I think the fact that they left him in for an extra series until he got that catch was a really good thing. The other thing, Garrett Danielson, I thought made a couple really good points. He made a lot of them, obviously, but with respect to the tight end room, there were a couple plays where he said Reynolds was wide open and Allar looked somewhere else. And it's hard for us to see that because we're watching from an opposite angle, and I'm kind of zeroed in taking photos from the press box. But I think Reynolds could have had an even bigger game had they been not so focused, rightfully so, on getting your wide receivers. I'm telling you, I don't think tight end, and I think we're all in agreement on this, I don't think tight end's an issue for this team. I think they're going to be just fine. I think they have to continue establishing their wide receivers, because if they don't do that, they're going to run into some of the same crap they ran into last year.
Yeah, far from an issue. Tight end's an asset for this team, and it remains a strength for this team. And James Franklin, although Tyler Warren's now wearing an Indianapolis Colts jersey, still considers the, quote, most complete tight end in college football to be on this roster. That's the label he applied to Khalil Dinkins. So a lofty praise for Dinkins. We've been hearing it all year from everyone within the facility, but obviously keep an eye on Luke Reynolds, Andrew Rapplier, and commentary today from James Franklin that I think really meshed well with what we've been telling you for a long time about Andrew Rapplier. If he's available last year, Luke Reynolds redshirts. And because he's not available, Luke Reynolds plays 250 snaps, starts 4 games. So you have a 3-headed monster here potentially that would not have been the case had Rapplier been full go last year. It would be Rapplier and Dinkins. And I don't want to say that it was a blessing in disguise, but the kind of the caveat there is you did get a lot of work for Luke Reynolds, and now you feel like you have 3 quality starting players at tight end. So good for Rapplier to shake things off. We said the same about Cam Wallace, and we can add Keon Wiley to that list as well. We saw as preseason camp ended and this team shifted in to game prep and on the practice field. Looked like Keon Wiley had separated himself a bit from everybody else who was not mentioned as those primary three linebackers. We had known for a while Tony Rojas, Dom DeLuca, Amari Campbell at the top of that room, at the top of that pecking order. And then Keon Wiley seemed to make his case as the fourth man. That was reflected in how they used him last Saturday. He was easily the fourth man in terms of rep count. We saw him get involved in a couple ways. We've talked about it in the past. Could he be an edge rusher for this team as the season progresses? He was a defensive end in high school, had 35 sacks in high school at Imhotep in Philadelphia. He also had 3 sacks his last season available with this team in 2023. But first things first, getting comfortable in Jim Knowles' system as a linebacker, now a redshirt junior. And James Franklin had plenty to say about him as well on Monday.
Yeah, I thought Franklin was pretty glowing in talking about Keon Wiley. We know that there's a reason, why he says everything that he does in these types of settings. But this is probably the most that we've really heard about Wiley in a while in terms of what he can actually do. Franklin called him one of the better athletes on the team, and he said, "quote I just want him to let it rip." And I think that that's what we've talked about with Wiley before, where we know he has the skill set of a pass rusher, of someone who can be potentially dynamic on that defense. And I think that once he is comfortable, once he has his role, once things I think are really set, we can probably start to see that a little bit more from him. When games are in doubt, when games are contested, as opposed to what we've seen from him earlier in his career, mostly in mop-up duty. Franklin says that at times that he's trying to be right rather than just going out and play. But Franklin feels that when there's a moment that it clicks, that it's really all going to come together for him. So we'll see. I mean, this is a guy that's in year 4, battled that injury, hasn't played a ton of football. But when you talk about that linebacker depth and really having only those 3 guys at the beginning of the year, you're going to need someone like Wiley to take these steps forward, to maybe push into that rotation a little bit to stay fresh over the course of a 16-17 game season at a physical position like linebacker. I think Wiley had an encouraging start to the season, and I think that over these next couple of weeks, we can see how it grows going into Oregon.
He was the guy who suffered his injury last spring, so pretty well removed from that. And I'll just note, we heard that Penn State was going to lean into the 4-2-5, and they owned the 4-2-5 over the course of Saturday. We saw a lot of 5 defensive backs, a ton of work for Kenny Wosley. And by the way, no update on Zion Tracy. His name did not come up today during James Franklin's press conference. He ultimately did not play on Saturday, a guy that we had pegged as the clear leader at nickelback. But with him unavailable, we got a lot of Kenny Wosley, a redshirt freshman who made his start. You saw a lot of Colin Dinkins eventually there as well. But something else to monitor, something we also hope to get an update on coming off the practice field Wednesday. I wanted to finish up, guys, with a special teams update, and it's one that we really didn't forecast. I don't think a lot of people did on the beat, but you no longer have Riley Thompson atop the plans at punter. He has held that role the last couple of seasons since making his transfer from FAU. He's been a great story, a young man who grew up in Australia and chasing his dream here in America, still has his family, his hometown in Australia. International story, though. We'll see where it goes next. Right now, he's the holder, though, for Penn State because Gabe Nwosu is the primary punter. There's been a lot of talk about Gabe over the course of his college career. Most of it has been about his size. But boy, do we get a startling comment from James Franklin. He says this young man is the closest they've had to Jordan Stout on special teams. Stout, of course, was an All-Big Ten performer. I believe he landed on some All-American lists here as a Nittany Lion, and he ultimately was a 4th-round pick in the NFL. So, Daniel, you're fresh off writing a story updating this process. Not only did we hear from Franklin that Nwosu has overtaken the starting punter job, he already is the kickoff specialist, but Franklin said he pushed for the place kicker job, which there you go. I mean, Jordan Stout did a little bit of everything for Penn State as well. I think that's the utility component that Franklin was referencing. What's your reaction here, and what did you put into your story that maybe we didn't get a chance to discuss earlier together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of the more surprising developments out of preseason camp. James Franklin compared it to Antoine Belgrave-Shorter winning that starting safety job. In terms of going into camp, you had guys penciled in based on what we saw last year and in the spring, and then things can change. I did think what you said, Tyler, that the stuff about him pushing for that place kicking job, very, very interesting. Franklin said that He hit that 62-yarder in Beaver Stadium during practice. Could have been good from 65 or 66. We'll see, as Penn State gets into different situations this year, if we do have, potentially a Ryan Barker, Gabe Wosu split like we saw in the past with Jake Pinniger and Jordan Stout and their line of demarcation. Penn State sputtered out pretty close to the goal line most of the time on Saturday. So Ryan Barker didn't get tested from deep too long, but that'll be something to watch. But yeah, I think just what Franklin said, that Gabe Wosu's A-ball is the best. He thinks one of the best in the country, but it's been a question of consistency for him. I think that's been a really big theme for a lot of these players that we're seeing step into larger roles this year, is that it's been a question of, we know you're talented, that there's a reason you're at Penn State, but it's just a question of being able to repeat it and do it week in and week out, day in and day out. I talked to Gabe Wosu in October 2023, and that was when he seized that kickoff specialist job. He started the 2022 season as that kickoff specialist. Sanders Sahadak got some run there. By the end of the year on that Rose Bowl run, it was Jake Pinniger doing that. Wosu said that the big thing for him going into 2023 was being consistent, doing it over and over and over again, making sure that he could do that. And it seems like it's been something similar for him, in terms of his punting. So we'll see. I mean, you can't miss him. He's listed at 6'6", 297 now. I remember, I think it was maybe my first year with Lions 247. I think Keziah Izzard had a lingering injury, and we'd always put it on the board that Izzard isn't dressed, and then someone would always say, well, there's a big 99 warming up right now. And they'd say, oh no, that's Gabe. That's the redshirt freshman 300-pound punter. But
NIL people must be lining up now, because if he actually is the punter and somehow becomes the kicker, he's already like a well-known commodity. Again, going through the broadcast, the quick Big Ten rap thing that they do. I mean, the announcers all know who he is because he's the biggest kicker in the history of kicking. So if he's doing all of this stuff, I can't even imagine the NIL opportunities. And then if he gets to the NFL, I know I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't take it one game at a time, but I can't even imagine the marketing opportunities for a 6'6", and that's probably conservative 300-pound kicker.
Yeah, it's really unique. I've linked to the story from 2024 when he was on Bruce Feldman's Freaks list that gave me that opportunity to write up that interview from 2023. His two older brothers were kickers in high school and college. One of his brothers was teammates with Dwayne Haskins at the Bullis School. So Gabe Wosu grew up watching those guys, watched them win a conference title at the Maryland private school, and just kind of wanted to follow in the footsteps of his big brothers. So pretty cool to see. A 5-year player who has seen his role steadily grow over the course of his career, and now he's a starter.
Yeah, from quarterbacks to injury updates, the freshmen to the 300-pound specialist, we covered a lot here on our podcast. We get with you every Monday. But Mark, I wanted to throw your way one more time, because by the time we reunite for our final pregame episode this week to preview the matchup against FIU and let you know what we all saw on the practice field, our current deal will be done, and I don't want to let it go by the wayside because it is our best offer of the year. Mark, one more time, let's close out the show. Give us the bullet points on this promotion that we have that ends on Tuesday night, if I'm correct.
Yeah, one, huge thanks to all of our subscribers. I mean, they are the backbone of what we do. Two, thank you to everybody who's come on board through the 75% off special. It's our best deal of the year. We're one of the network leaders on this promotion, and that means a lot to us. Without subscribers, we do not have the money to do the stuff. We can't invest in the kind of coverage that we're able to do. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that is really, really, really heartfelt and appreciated. So if you want to come on board, you have one more day. It ends Tuesday at midnight. Tuesday at 11:59, I guess, is a better way to put it. I always get confused when doing these, but it's 75% off. It comes out to $250 a month, less than 9 cents per day. It's really a good deal. I'm remiss in that last week when I was talking about this, I didn't pump up our recruiting coverage. Tyler Calvaruso doing a great job. Brian Doan has been so huge for us locally and in the entire 247 network of experts. They do just a great, great job. And I think people have seen we've made a little bit of a shift to having more VIP content, again, for the reasons that I'm talking about. We want to make sure that our VIP people know that we appreciate it. Also, Lions Pride Board, now all VIP. Again, stuff was ending up from the Lions Pride other places. We don't want to decrease the value for our subscribers. So I know I'm going off, but they are very, very, very important to us. This will match our best deal of the year, 75% off, and now is the best time to get in on board because you'll get the entire season, a full year to this time next year.
And we got another game week conversation updates going on with our thread on the message board. That'll go all the way up through kickoff. Every single week we'll launch another one of those. But along the way, as you said, a lot of recruiting updates coming out of the first weekend of visitors. They're getting ready for another weekend of campus visitors. We'll get Tyler Calvaruso on this podcast over the course of the week to give us the latest there. But you only get them in little pockets here on the podcast in season. You get them whenever you want over at Lions247.com with the VIP subscription. On behalf of these guys, we are through one game, many more to come. We're not sure just how many, but big season underway for the Nittany Lions. For Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for watching or listening to the Lions 24/7 podcast.